Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Matt Kemp onto the podcast. Matt is the co-founder of MEATOPIA. MEATOPIA is a weekend-long love affair with food, drink, fire and music, the ultimate bacchanalian party. MEATOPIA flies chefs in all around the world. It's an event at Tobacco Docks. They've worked with so many wildly successful and revered chefs. Yosemite Lengi, Fergus Henderson, Richard Corrigan. Alongside MEATOPIA, Matt is the partner of the famous butchers Turner and George, which he runs alongside Richard Turner, who trained under Marco Pierre White and has been absolutely instrumental in Hawksmoor. And on top of all of that, Matt runs a co-working space with my good friend and mentor Charlie called Workers League, and prior to that had a creative agency called Team Pie. Mate, thank you so much for coming on today. There's just so much to explore.
Hi Dan, yeah, no, my pleasure. Good to see you again.
So MEATOPIA is like categorically one of my favourite, days of the year. It's kind of when the summer begins to sort of yawn and shut its eyes. You're kind of in Tobacco Docks, the sun's like kind of tickling your neck. You're getting kind of tanked up in beers. You've got all the kind of the dancing flames and the kind of riot of meat, and the dishes are insane. It's kind of like a big, gorgeous wallop of everything I love in life, like booze, food, and music. And I literally remember last year, I think it was Robin Gill who had made this like pork miso burger thing. And
Okay.
I stuffed I think I had like 3 of them. I couldn't stop eating them. They were so good.
Yeah.
But I think the best place to start this conversation is with Josh Ozersky. So for listeners, Josh Ozersky is kind of he is the founding father of MEATOPIA, and he very sadly passed away. And actually, in prep for our conversation, I read his book on Colonel Sanders and the American Dream. Yeah, all about KFC, and we'll definitely jump into that. But I think to almost like kind of ignite the fire of exploration and curiosity, I'd love to kind of read a few quotes about Josh, and then we can kind of get your take on him. Sure. So on the MEATOPIA website, it says Josh Ozersky was a writer, an exceptional writer. He could write about a hamburger in a way that reduced grown men to tears, telling it like it is, with silver-tongued eloquence. He was respected by many great chefs and writers, but ruffled the feathers of a few others. And then the next one is Anthony Bourdain, who is kind of like my hero. I love Bourdain, and this is kind of paraphrased, but he says, Josh was usually the smartest in the room and the best writer by far, endeared him to few. He was careless with his opinions and his associations, passionate about his likes and dislikes. To Josh, a badly made grilled cheese sandwich was a crime against all humanity. Loved, despised, polarising, in love with hyperbole, diplomatically awkward to be around, and the very best writer in his field. And then the final one, another kind of hero of mine, is Jay Rayner, who says, Josh was a bull-necked, raging mensch of a man who founded the food festival MEATOPIA, helped pioneer food blogging in New York via the Grub Street site, and end up as restaurant editor of Esquire. So I would love to know, can you remember the first day you met Josh and the first conversation you had and what that was like, what that felt like?
I really can, yeah. So, I mean, I back in 2012 or something, I'd noticed this movement towards, wanting to know what your meat was, it's not just meat, we know what kind it is, what animal it came from, how it was raised. And I'd noticed Josh doing his MEATOPIA thing on sort of YouTube, and I'd seen it. It was something I really admired. I mean, the American meat industry is way worse than the British. We're generally grass fed, and we don't have cows in feedlots. We don't feed them grain. But Josh was really, he was against all the bad treatment of animals, and he was against global restaurants, and he wanted local people cooking great meat over live fire. And so I'd noticed that, and I thought, I was just starting working with Turner and George, and I thought this would be a great thing to bring over. So I can remember 2 things. One, the first time I spoke to Josh, and then the first time I saw Josh. So the first time I spoke to Josh, I actually phoned him up. I dropped him an email and said, look, could you do a call? And he said, yeah, sure. And when I sort of, the phone rang at his end, and I got the feeling it was like, this was maybe something had gone dreadfully wrong for him just recently, And then he was like, yeah, I could do this. I could definitely do it. And it was like, I really felt like I'd caught a great moment for him. And we had a long conversation. I mean, we had a lot of kind of really, touch points that we both agreed on. And he went away to let me know if he could come to London. And then obviously, he could. And the first time that he arrived in London, he arrived at our Bonhill Street offices. And this was classic Josh, because he got out the cab with his suitcase and he said, Matt, good to see you. I don't suppose you have any English pounds. I haven't got any. I didn't get any cash. I was like, yeah, fine. So he fleeced me for the first 20 quid or whatever it was for the taxi. Got out the taxi, and then immediately he opened up his suitcase, and in there, amongst all his stuff, were two vat-packed steaks from America that he brought over, and he said, these are the greatest sirloins I've had, Matt. Have these, So he got out the cab, had no cash, gave me meat, and then from then on, I think we went to a Greasy Spoon Calf, which he loved. He loved everything. He was. He was a lover of food, a lover of stuff. He immediately wanted to get something called a black and tan, which I think is a now bad way to describe. I think it's a bitter and a Guinness, but black and tan, I think, is what they used to call the old English police in Ireland. The ones that probably shot you and smashed you over the head with truncheons. So he was yeah. I mean, like Bourdain said, like Rayner said, he was an amazingly intelligent man, beautiful kind of orator and writer and all those kind of things. But he wouldn't stand on ceremony. He'd say exactly what he felt, and often, put people's noses out of joint at the same time as pleasing them.
No, definitely. And I implore listeners, there's a YouTube video of him, I think a Munchies one, it must have been 2010, I think. If you want to kind of, after this podcast, watch that to kind of really understand what he's like. He's just such a kind of rambunctious character who just bulges his way into every situation. I think he's got this thirst for life and, as you say, food. He's just got this insatiable thirst. Yeah. And I really appreciate it. Is that the one where
he takes his top off? Is that
well, yeah,
rooftop barbecue.
Yeah, well, he's basically doing this whole thing where he's getting all this food for people, and he's like, "Oh, fuck that," and just goes to the local corner shop, and then starts frying all this beef up on this really a hot summer's day on this New York rooftop. It's hilarious.
He hated that video because he takes his shirt off, and he was a well-rounded man, but I don't know if he explains in that video the reason he did that is because he said he didn't have a t-shirt that didn't have a grease spot on it, and he just got this new t-shirt, and he's like, I don't want to get any grease on this new, so he took the shirt off, but then he's been immortalised now, shirtless and rotund, cooking. But I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing, I think it really does. You're right. It does kind of describe Josh, and maybe not in exactly the perfect way he saw himself, but really in the way that he was,
And kind of what I've, again, from just doing the research on Josh, and he was this big character, but he seemed to kind of attract quite a lot of chaos. And I'm speculating here, so I don't want to you know him way better than me, but he seems to have potentially attracted a bit of chaos in his life, as he was quite polarizing. What I learned from Bourdain, the biggest kind of cautionary tale with him is that, you can have the most amazing job and kind of life in the world, but if you don't kind of address your own sort of demons and stuff like that, then it can kind of have very nefarious consequences. What are some of the maybe cautionary tales that from being so close to Josh, that since his passing, that you've kind of maybe taken into your life?
I mean, I think the thing is we're quite different people. I mean, Josh, like a lot of genius people, had his, as you say, had his failings, and one of the things he suffered with I think it was ADHD. So what was in fact his physical downfall was there's a drug they give you to deal with ADHD, which is actually almost like a speed. So because it sort of sharpens you, so you focus. I think that's the it's not Ritalin, but it's something like that they give you in the States. And because it is a kind of almost like a speed, I think people can get almost addicted to it. So what he was, the doctors had said to him, look, you can't take too much of this, Josh, and especially don't take it whilst drinking. And his actual, the last night he had popped a few of these tablets, and in fact it's kind of, it's very Josh. But the last sort of sighting of him was he was I think it might have been a James Beard Award dinner or something, but he was filmed at about 4 or 5 in the morning dancing on a table with some girls singing to Dolly Parton's 9 to 5. And what happened is sadly this drug he would take for the ADHD would potentially cause fits, and I think that's what he had. He had a bit of a fit in a hotel room and kind of sort of swallowed his own tongue, I guess. So I mean, it's not I'm not giving you kind of highbrow information on what not to do. It's more practical, like don't overdo it on the ADHD drugs. I think is my takeaway from that.
No, definitely. And I think kind of what you said there about, him having his, not shortcomings, but he was polarizing. Like where were you when you received the news of his death? And like, how did that feel? Like, I can't imagine that.
It was really weird actually, because it was obviously with the time difference in the States. And I kind of woke up I think I had a message from Richard actually, and it was a WhatsApp or something saying, could Josh be dead? And I was like, I don't know, could he? And it was, we were sort of just getting news coming in from the States. So we heard it via, news channels, not via anyone else. I mean, I flew out to his funeral, which was amazing. Loads of people turned up for that in New York. It was actually uptown somewhere. There was a great restaurant and a hotel by a fantastic chef whose name evades me right now. It was brilliant, and he ran like a hotel and a kind of a restaurant, and the whole thing was down there with like kind of New Orleans style sort of musicians and singers, and there was a candlelight vigil, and it was amazing. But that's how we heard, and it was just like a kind of a disbelief. So it was. I mean, I guess this is what people often say about great people is, they were so alive last time I saw them. This was the thing. He wasn't a dying man. He was very much not a dying man, and it was a kind of a tragic end. So yeah, it was mostly just disbelief. He wasn't particularly old. He wasn't the healthiest guy, but it wasn't his health that was that let him down. It was a mistake.
No, definitely. And I almost kind of, and this is a question I ask a lot of guests, and it's like almost trying to sum things up in a sentence, because I think that's really actionable for listeners. What if everything, after everything you've kind of the time you spent with Josh, if you could sum up everything he kind of taught you into one sort of punchy sentence, I think that's really actionable for listeners. Like, what would that be, and why?
I think basically it would be cut through the bullshit, believe in the delicious, and just go for quality. Naturally reared, as basically cooked as you can get, and believe in that, and go local. I mean, he was a massive believer in he was always wanting to take us to a little neighbourhood joint somewhere on the Lower East Side, or over in Brooklyn, or in sort of Williamsburg, or that's what he was all about. He was all about the local, and really New York. He loved New York. He really did love New York. It was that. Yeah, it was go for the real. Don't go for the bullshit. And go for the high quality. I mean, he really believed in high ethics meat, but mainly he would say, it's obviously for the kindness, but also because meat that you've been kind to tastes more delicious.
It's so. I'm just thinking for our listeners, there's so many parallels that in terms of like, building a business and a brand. It's like cut through the bullshit and go for like the authentic, real, delicious thing. Keep it simple to who you are. I love that. There's so many parallels, because I think lots of food brands or businesses can end up trying to looking like the competition and not being like, what I love about Josh is he was like, this is what I think, I'm going to say it, I'm going to stand my ground, I don't really care what you think. And that's just such a great insight.
One great memory actually of Josh was in, it must have been in probably about 2015, and it was at MEATOPIA, and Fred Smith, who was currently at the time, he was head chef with Byron, and he made this amazing, it was an amazing burger, and I think it was one of the most expensive burgers we'd made, because it was a Wagyu patty that he'd ground, and it had Comté cheese, which at the time was like, you know, however many pounds per 100 gram, and it was with like maybe with a truffle mayonnaise, and it was in a demi brioche bun. You know, people were only just doing demi brioche buns then. It was like quite a new thing, and Josh came over. He's like, "Yeah, it's a great burger, but hold on one second." And he ran off. Fred was sort of left there holding the burger, and he ran off, came back, went to Shake Shack, came back with a Shake Shack potato bun, took the burger out of the expensive brioche bun, put it into the Shake Shack bun, and went, "There you go, now it's perfect." I don't want to sound like Michael Jackson there, but that's just my bad impression of Josh.
That's hilarious. But I love that because it's so easy to not say that thing, and I really revere and respect people who've got the bollocks to say what they actually want to say.
Yeah.
Where I want to go to now, mate, is kind of how you personally got into kind of creativity, food, drink, where you kind of got that lust and appetite for it. And maybe we could jump into the weeds of, your childhood. And is there any like specific moments in your childhood where you thought, right, I want to be in the business of creativity and sort of music and food? Like, where did that come from for you personally?
I mean, I've always been. I mean, I was always designing stuff. I started my first company at I think I was 12 with my mate Paul. It was called DK Auto Valeting and Cleaning. Basically, we were washing cars, but we had a logo and we had business cards, and a little electric Hoover, you know, battery powered. But you know, I was always about kind of trying to redesign stuff. My mum said I was just a nightmare, you know, and I'd always take things apart and to see how they worked, you know, to try and put them back together again, and you know, obviously never did, so everything was just busted. But I was always into and working for myself. She said I always wanted to, you know, turn all the switches on myself, and you know, from a very early age. But I was always fascinated with design and with advertising. So I went into advertising in my earlier career, and I was just fascinated with how you sort of promoted and designed and you know, sort of promoted stuff. The music, I mean, I realised early on that I was a big food fan. So I mean, I've always had to, you know, keep an eye on my intake and my exercise and my, you know, I would easily eat my own weight if not stopped. But I mean, you know, and I love flavours. I was a drummer, which many musicians would say mean I wasn't a musician. I was the one who drove the van, but, you know. But I was in bands. I always, you know, I play a little bit of piano, but you know, I'm mostly a thumper. So, but you know, I've always had a love of music, always had a love of art, design, and food. And it was really only after I'd done maybe a 10-year career in advertising, and got quite jaded with it, really, because you know, what any creative wants to do is design stuff, and what advertising always makes you do is funnels you into doing what the client wants you to do, so to sell the sanitary product or the soap or the dishwasher tablets, whatever it is. Yeah. So you know, I got quite jaded with it eventually. I was working for, you know, I had a great time. I worked for M&C Saatchi in Soho. Had a fabulous time, but yeah, got to my 30s. I got to the end of my 20s. And realised I was, you know, dreadfully overweight, drinking far too much, you know, not living a very good life. And the change happened when I walked out of advertising, started working for myself as a creative. So I started my own creative agency, which was called Team Pie, as you said earlier. And then the turning point was when I met James George. So James runs a retail wholesale butcher called Select, which serves, you know, many restaurants in London and wider out into England. Don't know how far north they go and how far south, but they did start as a London thing. And James is, you know, a remarkably inspiring person. He started the whole thing himself, and he actually trained as a copywriter. So we were introduced together because I was an art director, and a fellow art director I'd met at TBWA, Ed. He went to art college with James, James basically realised he had a business idea and sort of quit after the first year. I don't think he wanted to hang around with dope smoking students while it's like, I'm going to crack on. So James basically came to me. He wanted to start the company which we eventually called East London Steak Company. He realised there was a movement towards really good quality meat and knowing where it came from, and we actually started like probably the first website-driven fresh meat delivery thing in London in about 2009 or 10 or something like that. We started East London Steak Company, and it was basically James sourcing meat from small farms. He had a lot of butchers there already who were doing more mainstream, larger supply meat, and he'd sort of hive off a couple of hours to do this special meat, which we'd then put in beautiful boxes, wrap in paper, tie with string, put little handwritten cards in, and the select vans would take it out to customers in London. If only we'd realised, we did realise, but we were way before Amazon Fresh, we were way before any of the meal kit delivery companies. I think we were way before any supermarket doing deliveries, to be honest. But we then we started working with Richard Turner, and obviously he'd done a lot of work on Hawksmoor, and what makes steak taste good? Why is it good? Why do you go to a restaurant, you buy a great steak, and then the next day you go back and it's shit? Why is that? And they did loads of work on it being, it's breed, it's how the animal's kept, it's what they eat, it's where they eat, it's how long they live. And so that, that was I fell into this thing with James and then Richard, and I realised, the first time I had a piece of dry age, I clearly remember, like James gave me this bit of, we cooked it, a bit of a dry aged T-bone, and we cooked, and it was almost black, this thing was not pink and red like you've been told it should be. It smelt kind of nutty and cheesy, not like you told meat should be. And I ate it, and I was like, fucking hell, this is meat. Why did I even like steak before? What did I like about steak before? This is steak. It's like so different that, between, what I thought I liked. And that sort of set me on a whole path. I'm like, right, I'm sold on this now. This is me. So what happened after that is I kind of, I really lost interest in the other things I was doing and started focusing on Turner and George, on MEATOPIA. MEATOPIA came later, by the way. So MEATOPIA was an idea I had to publicise Turner and George, except it never worked. It just publicised itself. It was too big. But we did. So I met Josh, came up with this idea, like let's do an event, a one-off event in London. Turner and George can be the sponsor. It's to publicise the opening of our first shop. And who knew it was going to be? It was one day, 3,000 people. But yeah, I kind of haven't really looked back, and then it just kind of makes sense to me now. I've got a Workers' League, as you say, Charlie and I run a co-working slash hospitality company now, because the pandemic happened and people didn't go to offices. Boris specifically told people, don't go to Matt's office. Which was very kind of him, and he didn't give us any money or anything, nor did business rates, nor did the landlords. It was a huge loss of cash, and so we kind of pivoted that company to be more of a kind of you pop in, you do a couple of days, and I've started doing chef pop-ups with it. I've started introducing the food and the drink and the music to Workers' League. So although it loses it still hasn't made any money yet. It's now a much more rounded and enjoyable company, and I really think it's now that was the missing magic that needed to be thrown in to make it work as a band. I think
Yeah, there's so much in that, Matt. I think the first thing, and it was really interesting because I wanted to see how your childhood would then manifest in MEATOPIA. And, you're saying about being a drummer, starting a business early, kind of having the creative side into it, and then obviously finally following your kind of scratching your itch and following your passion, and then, finding meat. And I really... Obviously, when you go to MEATOPIA, it kind of makes sense. It does. There is definitely parallels between your childhood and MEATOPIA. And I think for listeners, what's really reassuring is I think lots of our listeners are think they've got to have everything fucking figured out. And I think what I love about your story is you were just following your passion, and eventually it came, even in your 30s, which isn't late at all, but for 20-year-olds listening to this, they're thinking, I need to get everything sorted now. So I think that's
I can remember when I was in my teens and 20s thinking like 30. By the time I'm 30, I'll only be wearing tailor-made suits. I'll probably have a black BMW and a family house. That's it. You're now a dad or something, so I get it. Yeah. I mean, 30 is late.
Yeah, no, but it's so interesting. And then also, I suppose through the business lens, about being the ability to pivot and change with what you're doing. And I think lots of our listeners are kind of startups who are trying to get their idea going. And I love what you've done there with the Workers' League and pivoting into almost making it kind of, more of a hospitality thing. I think because James Cochran's coming on this podcast in a couple of weeks, actually, because he does a lot of work with you. And we've had Sauce Shop on here as well on the podcast. Yep. So I love that. I think the ability to pivot and turn is amazing. What I want to kind of jump into now is this book that I read by Josh. It's all about basically Colonel Sanders and the American Dream, the guy who created KFC. And I kind of gorged and hailed this book super quickly. I mean, the way Josh writes is kind of scrumptious and succinct, and you can just, it's dreamy. You sort of just glide through it. But I kind of want to pull like the bargain bucket of lessons from this book almost and use that as a lens to explore MEATOPIA. Now, the first thing is kind of Colonel Sanders, and it talks about this in this book, was this kind of like dogged masochist who would just bludgeon his way through things with like sanguine like enthusiasm. He'd just get through obstacles. And there was a story of him trying to he had this one of his KFC or early KFC kind of roadside restaurants was doing really, really well. And then the government came in and thought, right, fuck this, we're going to put a massive road through it. And it basically was a massive, massive obstacle. I would love to know from your first phone call with Josh and the first time he came to London and he had the suitcase full of steaks, in that kind of from that meeting to the first couple of MEATOPIAs, what were some of the biggest obstacles you faced or unforeseen obstacles that you faced, and like how did you swim around them?
Yeah, do you know what? And in fact, it's a great book to read. That one, I've read a lot of his books, and that one is a really great one to read because Josh was fascinated with KFC and Colonel Sanders. To put this into context, I mean, Josh was a brilliant guy. He had great ideas, but he was a flawed businessman, I think. But he might have part of his flaw might have been he was terrified of becoming Colonel Sanders, because Colonel Sanders basically never made the money out of KFC, did he? It wasn't him. It all happened later on, and he was, I think, I mean, I'd have to go and reread the book, but I think he gave away the secret, didn't he? That's it. He sold it to another guy or something and died. I don't think he was destitute, but he wasn't rich, was he?
No, so he had a lot of chaos in his life as well. So he sort of would make money and then lose it all, make money, get divorced, lose it all, make money, lose it all. Right. And I think at the end, he got kind of ousted out by by some of the big kind of monolithic corporates. Exactly.
So, I mean, Josh was terrified of becoming Colonel Sanders. And what we wanted to do, so when we first met, our plan was to bring it over here. We're going to do it once. So I said, look, we'll pay you a license fee. We arranged, for that to that. So we licensed his brand. As we went along, we started talking about, look, how can we get involved, Josh? How can we... he started running ones in New York that had a lot of corporate sponsorship, to be honest. I went to his one. It was on top of one of the loading bays on the west side of the island, I think. One of these great big container ports, and it was great. I mean, there were great chefs, but I think Coolio might have been playing as well. It was a bizarre thing. It was freezing cold on top of this thing that was like, and it was just facing out to the sea, and you walked in there and there was like Coca-Cola, Evian, I mean every brand. He'd just taken anyone who would give him the cash, and that's one of the things that I kind of really wanted to change about the London one. We won't talk to any brand that isn't isn't applicable. So I mean, I won't mention any names, but I mean, I was approached once by a luxury car brand, and they said, look, we'll give you a load of money, we'll put a car in the middle of MEATOPIA. And I was like, why? Is it wood powered? Does it have a barbecue built in? I mean, why would I do that? You know, so I didn't do that. And I've also been approached by high street supermarket chains, and again with a lot of money, and it's like, guys, I can't do it because I don't believe in your food or your methods, so I really can't do that. And then we've been, I mean, cigarette brands, when you're allowed to do that, I'm like, just no, sorry. You know, vaping brands, can't really do that either. So you know, that's one thing that I kind of learned, and we changed. But going forward, you know, we were trying to get to this position of buying into MEATOPIA. In the end, we bought the brand. It was all lined up to do, and we bought the brand off his estate. In the end, his wife, you know, sort of finished off the process. But he was always terrible of selling it short and selling it. You know, we'd get to the point where we were going to go, right, we'll buy into half of it or whatever, and he'd be like, you know, kind of backing off because he's thinking, am I doing a Colonel Sanders? Am I selling out? And we, you know, in the end, we just managed to convince him, you know, that we had the same ideals. We had the same, in fact, maybe even more purist than he was, you know. So that was the, you know, those were the kind of things we had to sort of swim around, if you like. Were kind of, you know, Josh's fear at losing his baby, and you know, us trying to sort of steer it into this market where it wasn't, you know, back in the States, his whole thing was against these dreadful feedlot cows, where they take these cows, they you know, it's not the cowboys now riding over the range and moving them around over hundreds of miles. It's like they take all that land, they'll sell it, build a town on it, put the cows in concrete troughs where they hardly move, fill them full of grain, which makes them really nice and fatty, but all those high in saturated fats, you know, that USDA fat that sticks to the top of your mouth. And the whole grading system, the USDA grading system, is just about fat. It's not about flavour. And it's like, whereas grass-fed meat has more sort of omega-6s and stuff, which is more, you know, the kind of fats you find in salmon and fish. I'm not saying it's good for you, it's less bad. But, you know, he was fighting against that. And when you come to Britain, it's not, we didn't have that same, you know, dreadful mass marketing of beef and chicken. We have better standards anyway. So it was more about steering it now into, right, it's about the ethics, it's about the quality of the meat, and the brands that we work with, I felt had to fit those kind of, you know, our sort of ideals on that front.
That's so interesting. No, it really does. What I find really interesting is almost how Josh was the obstacle. He was almost the architect of as in, you know, you had to convince him that he wasn't letting go of his baby, and he was scared of becoming Colonel Sanders. I found that really interesting.
I mean, it wasn't, I suppose unwittingly he became an obstacle in his own, in his own, fear of being, of becoming the Colonel Sanders character. Yeah.
And I think for listeners, a lot of people can become their own obstacles. That's something I haven't actually talked about, but you can, either your ego can become an obstacle, or your fear, i.e. you're paralysed and you won't try the business you want to do. That's really interesting about we as humans becoming our own obstacle. That's probably a conversation for a different day, but the other thing about what I love about this, and again, this is kind of a salient sort of sticky piece of wisdom from every guest on the podcast, is lots of brands actually define themselves by what they say no to. And it's like, if you know your core values, so saying no to the car, saying no to the vapes, saying no to the ciggies, that kind of, yes, what you say no to is what builds your brand. I think is a really interesting kind of thing there.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of, you know, so we've never, and just, you know, a lot of people think that we've made a great deal of money out of MEATOPIA. And I mean, it costs a hell of a lot of money to put on, and it makes a little bit more, you know, hopefully, touch wood, but you know, we could have made a whole load more money out of it. And I think the fact that we've stayed kind of really true to our ideals and our beliefs is why it is what it is now. You know, I think its success is built on all those things, and also that I think we're the only food festival that insists on inviting chefs and then go and tasting the food. You know, we often we'll get a call or an email from people saying, "How do I buy a stand at MEATOPIA?" And it's like, well, Doesn't really work like that. You know, if you haven't been asked, that it's probably you can't. You know.
Yeah, I love that. And again, sort of just sidestepping into my curiosity here, like, how the hell did you get Ottolenghi to come down? Like, what was that sales pitch? Because I love him. I think his what he's done to food is just insane.
I mean, it's just, do you know what? It's the MEATOPIA thing. So there's a lot of chefs that just won't do. Again, I mean, should I mention other food festivals or?
Well, mate,
I mean,
as I say, we can cut it out if you want. Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to. So there are a lot of other food festivals that are much more commercial, and it would be. You know, you'd phone up, you go, "How much is the pitch?" And they go, "It's 10 grand." You know, and there you go. And it's like, you know, what you're going to cook, whatever you like. What are you going to charge? Whatever you like, doesn't matter. You know. So we're the only one that we build a menu, and I think what we've done is we're now. And because we insist on having head chef, so you come to MEATOPIA, you're going to be served. If their name's above that, that's who's serving you, unless they're gone to the toilet or having a beer or whatever, you know. But I mean, that's essentially, if Yotam Ottolenghi's got his name up there, he's going to be the guy serving to you. So it's that sort of. It's about for us. It's about and the one dish. It's about the quality of the dish. It's about the chef. You know, the chef. It's all chef centric. And it's about, you know, the fire and the honesty of just being there, talking to your food hero. And I think there are some chefs that won't do other food events where it's like, doesn't really matter if you're there or not, sell anything you like at any price, you know, it doesn't really matter. You know, that it's not the same. It's not the same. I think MEATOPIA has become, and even though, you know, Ottolenghi is very much better known for his vegetables than his meat. He does cook meat, and he only cooks really, really good meat. But it's, you know, the reason he came to MEATOPIA is because of our ethics and our quality, and the fact that it's all about the chef. Interestingly, I mean, he's the only guy who's ever done a vegetarian dish, because he said on one of the days, I want to do a vegetarian dish, and we just said, you're the man, you do it. And I remember him doing his grilled celeriac, which was fantastic, you know. And then he got up and he did a cutting room display with DJ Barbecue up on the stage, doing this, you know, demoing this celeriac, and got loads of comedy boos from people, you know, boo, you know, and he's like, I'm a veg guy, you know, because Josh had a famous, probably now very politically incorrect statement. He would say like, I don't mind vegetarians, but will they stop eating my food's food?
That is hilarious. That is absolutely hilarious. And again, it goes back to because I've been to MEATOPIA and I've been to other food festivals, and it does feel like this. Is what I was trying to dig into coming into this conversation. Is it does palpably feel different when you're at MEATOPIA, and it's not. And as I said, I won't mention names, but I've been at other festivals which it just feels like you feel like you're a foie gras getting stuffed with corporate bollocks. Do you know what I mean? It's not that pleasant. And I think it's actually, again, it goes back to what are you saying no to, the simplification of the dish. It's one dish, it's the fire, and the wood, and it's, you know, the chef's name is above. The chef is actually cooking the food for you, and I think 100%. It goes back to this authenticity thing. And do you have, and again, this may sound a bit sort of corporate wanky, but like, do you have specific values at MEATOPIA that you live by, and do you use them as like almost like to fend off the decisions?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, firstly, I mean, yeah, at the very basics. I mean, yeah, you can't. There's no chip fryer. I'd have a chip fryer probably if you could have a live fire chip fryer. I've got no beef with chips, to use a punny phrase. But you literally can't put a box of oil on a fire. Well, I won't anyway. So, you know, it's from the very basics. It's fire, smoke and fire, wood and coal, and it's not. You don't have electricity. You don't have sous vide. You don't have microwaves. But then moving on from that, you know, if we need to know that all the produce comes from a good place. So, I mean, I'd happily. I'm sure Turner and George would happily supply meat to chefs. Although we don't insist on it, because actually, if we had to supply, you know, 50 chefs over 2 weekends with 30,000 portions of meat or whatever it is, you know, we wouldn't be able to do it. But we want to know who your butcher is or where the meat's coming from. It needs to be, we need to know it's from a good source. And there's lots of great butchers, and there's lots of small butchers. But you know, if you said your meat's coming from a, you know, like a supermarket or from a you know, flown in from abroad frozen, and it's like can't have that. So yeah, we do have those principles we stand by. And then we then go through the ingredients with the chefs. We need to make sure it's not featuring anything that's you know, dreadfully harmful to the environment or anything. We insist our fuel. So Mark Parr from London Logs sources our fuel. It's all the wood is dried hardwood. It burns cleaner. It's less particulate. So if it's a hardwood, closer grain, burns cleaner. If it's dried properly in a biomass dryer, you know, as eco as possible, even though we are going to burn it, it emits less of these fat particulates. If you buy crap wood from the garage that's all softwood and kind of not dried properly, it releases all these big lumps of horrible ash around the place. And you know, we don't want things we don't want, you know, Wagyu flown in from Australia. So we try and concentrate as much as we can on our ethics and our footprint, whilst obviously, you know, killing and cooking animals and lighting fires. But then, you know, the cutting room now, I mean, I do a lot of stuff on the cutting room about, you know, how can, if we're going to continue eating meat, how can we do that as responsibly as possible? And that's often about eating less meat, eating more high quality meat and eating less meat. And it's about maybe getting into things like no plough farming, where you're not ploughing the land, so the carbon doesn't come back out. You're using needlepoint planting systems. You're putting animals on the arable crops to crap on it and walk around on it, and then I won't go deep into that, but it's fascinating, that whole process. But those are our ethics.
Yeah, no, I think it's great for listeners. Like, once you've got values that are authentically you, stick to them, because it allows you to say no to things that aren't right. And when you say no to things, you build a better, like, well, either event or brand. And that's, and I think when I was at MEATOPIA, it's something, you feel very human there, because it's not all this corporate stuff. You've got the fire. It's something very kind of simplistic about it. So kind of back to the Colonel Sanders book, and there's another kind of brilliant, well, not brilliant, anecdote in there. And lots of the guests I've interviewed, and one of the hardest things brands have, and potentially this is true with the festival too, is keeping the founder's magic alive as you scale, right? Because as the teams build, you get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you need that founder's magic, because that's the spark. That's almost like the spark to the fire, right? Yep. And obviously Colonel Sanders passed away, and what KFC did, and this is really corporate, but they basically put, I think it was in their Louisiana office, like a museum of the Colonel, and it's all like the stuff in his house, and they're trying to keep that founder's magic alive. Yeah. Obviously, with MEATOPIA, like, how do you keep Josh almost, and his magic, like, omnipotent as when he's not here? Is there anything you and Richard do, like, and impart that and let that spill into the chefs? So how do you do that?
I mean, absolutely. So I mean, we always have a page on the website. It's not front and center. You know, you go and click on Josh Ozersky, but it'll always be there. But every year, so I always open the show on Saturday, even though it opens on Friday night. We don't open outside properly until Saturday. And on Saturday, before the first cutting room session, I always get up and I welcome everyone, and I always say, and we're here because of our founder Josh Ozersky, and I describe him, and we hold up a drink, and we always, every year, I do that. And some people who come every year, I'm like, look, I'm sorry, I'm going to fucking bore you with this again, but you know, and I do a little bit just about Josh, and about why we're here, and it's not just rampant commercialism. You know, we don't want to lose money, but it's not, you know, don't get me wrong, we don't, you know, we are a business, but some of those other food festivals make loads more money than we do. And even though it's like, some people will sort of think, oh, it's really expensive, you know, it's like, but you know, we're not actually, it costs a hell of a lot of money to put that event on, and to, you know, this week I'm going out to taste dishes and you know, and plan things, and so yeah, that's what we always do. We keep his memory alive on the website, in person. But I mean, the amount of times I do find myself, it's cheesy, but I do literally find myself saying, you know, thinking, you know, what would Josh do? Some of the times you think, yeah, no, I won't do that. That's what Josh would do, but I won't do that. But just, you know, the basics, I think, the real core principles of kind of, you know, sort of real good food, well kept, keep true to cooking it over fire, real fire, and try and keep, you know, sort of support the small, bring forward the kind of the local restaurant. It doesn't have to be a French trained chef. It could be like this year we've got a guy called Ruben Dorney, Rubens, and he's just a guy from Brixton who's making pastrami in his garden. And started making Reuben sandwiches, and it's like, you know, that's exactly the kind of, every year we'll have some of those kind of, just, I don't know what Reuben did before. Maybe he was at school. Maybe he was worked in a chemist. I've yet to meet him. But you know, these guys who weren't chefs, they just had a passion, and they decided, like, I really want to make a really good thing, and then they make it, and then they sell it, and then it's like, you know, they carry on that kind of passion. So, yeah, we always have Josh in mind.
That's so interesting, and there's just so much in that for listeners. Because the more I'm sort of thinking this through now, is I think the founder of any business should be the person who's creating the values, and the values must be unique. And as you scale, it's about feeding the team into those values.
Yeah.
And obviously, what you're doing with Josh is, even though he's not here anymore, you've got his pretty stringent values. And it allows you to kind of stick to them and ask that question, you know, what would Josh do? And I think it's really interesting seeing how it manifests at MEATOPIA. And yeah, there's so much in that for listeners. Where I want to go now, Matt, is to Richard Turner, who is, you know, he worked under, I think, the Roux brothers, Pierre Kaufman, Marco Pierre White. He's obviously super involved in Hawksmoor, which is an amazing restaurant. And on Richard's Instagram, I actually clicked on his Instagram in prep for this, and it says, veteran author, investor, mountaineer, food pusher, pilgrim nomad, and accomplished dog walker. I did what I did, now it's done. And he just seems to be this, almost kind of akin to Josh in that, just this guy who's just super passionate about life. Like, when was the first day you met Richard, and what was that like? Because I think he was in the army, wasn't he? I think
he was in the army. I mean, I didn't know Rich in his army days. I mean, his food days came. I mean, he's another guy, you know, a bit like myself, and a bit like, in football terms, a bit like Ian Wright, I suppose. I mean, he came pretty much into chefing, I think, in his, I'm going to say 30s, but maybe late 20s. But he was, I won't describe his early career too much. He'd have to do that. But I believe he was in the Paras. I believe he then went into security, and I believe he developed his love of food by looking after rich people and going around, you know, lovely restaurants and sitting on a table in the because you wouldn't sit out the back eating a burger. You'd sit in the restaurant so you could keep your eyes on the prize, so you'd end up eating, you know, really good food. And I think, but I'm going to sort of praise him, but I mean, I think basically he walked up to, it was either one of the Roux or Raymond Blanc or someone, I can't remember who it was, but just said, you know, I want to cook, can you give me a job? And he went, yeah, have this mop. That's where you start. So, you know, he started mopping floors, but he obviously went in the hard way, and I think that's what you've got to do in those kind of restaurants. You've got to, you know, your first job is mopping the floor, and then you move up to maybe, you know, wiping a surface, and then maybe someone at some point will let you stir a sauce. Or, I mean, I've never been through that kind of training, but it sounds very, very, I mean, almost military in its kind of, you know, in the ranks, the old French system, and kind of, you know, I guess if you've had a, you know, military training, I guess it kind of, you know, it might set you well for that sort of thing, you know. But the first time I met Rich was to do with Turner and George, actually, and it's classic James George, because I don't think he told either Rich or I that we were meeting the other, and we were kind of like, who's this guy? And it's like James had obviously planned that we'd be business partners, but negated to mention it, you know. So we sort of like were kind of, and you know, he's you know, Rich is a. You know, an amazing. Also, another inspiration. I mean, you know, his commitment to kind of, you know, meat and why it's good, and you know, why have a good animal? why let it live longer? Why choose the breed? I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about that from him. I mean, but he's also he's just what does he call himself? There's a trencherman. So he's a great. He loves flavour. Loves kind of. He's got a kind of a super taste, I think, which is almost annoying. Like
he's got what? Sorry.
Super taste. He says he's a super taster. Super taster people who taste a little bit more than other people. Children. So when you're a child, I think one of the reasons children like bland food is because children have got more taste buds than we have. Did you know that?
No. That's
I think you're born with more taste buds, and then you wear them away during your life with drink, fags, hot food. So I think, and I mean, you should maybe research this before you put it on air. But I think that the reason that kids, they like really plain foods, they can taste more in it, and I think Richard's got he's one of those people that's got more taste buds, which can just be annoying because it's like he's tasting something that no one else can taste. But I've learned loads about what you can mix with things, and putting anchovy with beef, for instance, is a Richard Turner thing, which always works. I mean, just learning from him. He's quite a closed book. He can be, so you have to draw stuff out of him. But yeah, he's much more now into. He's sort of had this reputation of man of meat, But he loves cooking fish, loves cooking vegetables. It's just that he was sort of almost typecast into the meat guy. But the thing that unites everything, all of the things we do, I think really is the fire, because it's like nothing would happen without the fire. You're always going to cook over the fire. So whatever you're cooking, the fire is the thing that unites. So Rich is a great fan of cooking over real fire and smoke. And
yeah, why is because it's interesting, because I always think it's the meat that comes before the fire. But again, doing prep for this, as you say, it's all about the fire. Why is the fire? I'm coming into this pretty ignorant, to be honest, mate. But why is the fire more important, and how does that change the flavour of the meat and all that sort of stuff?
I mean, I think firstly it's a kind of a sort of a basic thing, isn't it? I mean, I wasn't around in the world before fire existed, or before we harnessed it. But I imagine it was a fairly kind of, basic place. I mean, what you maybe eating berries or taking bites out of snakes. I don't know what you did, before fire. But that kind of, once you got fire, you're like, wow, I mean, look at what happens to things. Like, look what happens to a bit of fat when you put fire on it, and it bubbles and it crisps. And what happens to sugar when you put fire on it? It turns into caramel. Even butter. I mean, I've got an obsession lately with brown butter, which is basically you just cook butter slowly till it goes brown and bubbles, and before it burns, and it gets this nutty sweetness to it. So I mean, I think it's a basic thing. Man. And when I'm saying man, I mean mankind, not male man. Man and fire, when they came together, that was the first revolution, right? Look what we can do. And I just think that, you take a bit of meat and you stick it in the microwave, sure it'll cook, but will it get those kind of, will it get that Maillard effect on the outside? Will it get that kind of crispiness? Will you get those kind of buttery and cheesy and kind of sugary flavours happen to it when you're putting something in smoke and you're cooking it for a long time, and all the capillaries and sinews are breaking down slowly with that heat, and you're getting that flavour from the wood. And someone like Mark Parr can tell you, if you're gonna cook beef, you put this kind of wood in, or you put it in at this time, at this temperature, and that'll make it sort of that sort of flavour note come in. And if you go too far with it, it'll get get acidy flavours. If it'll get bitter, or it'll get sweet, or it's just incredible the way you can use fire to not just to cook, but to impart flavour and get different textures and get crispinesses and burned bits and burnt ends. You can't get burnt ends without having fire. You can, well, maybe you can with some sort of hot fan. I've got no idea, but I mean, I just think fire. It's a very basic thing, and it sort of. I think it also inspires, emotions in people. People just. If you've got a fire, you had a wood, a dark place, and there's a fire in the middle of it, and there's people around, they'd slowly gravitate towards the fire, wouldn't they? Stand there and look at it and throw things in it, and then start talking. And fire is something that people stand around and all right, yeah, all right, How's it going? And eventually you'll have a big crowd of people all talking and, toasting things and throwing sticks in. And it's kind of pretty much when I first had the idea for bringing MEATOPIA here, you'd be amazed how difficult it was to get brands involved or collaborators involved. I'd sort of come up with the idea, right, this is what we're doing, and people would be like, so, right, it's like a barbecue with DJs. Don't really get it. And it's like, you think now, this was before or maybe not before Street Feast, but before a lot of these big food events. And my thinking was, look, it's simple. It's like, if you have a barbecue at your house, right, you go out in the garden, everyone comes together, they're a little bit reticent at the first point, but, they gravitate towards the fire, have a little chat, poke something with a fork, have a drink, loosen up, and then you all end up in the kitchen getting pissed and dancing around the work surface. And it's like, it's that, isn't it? How is that unusual, So it's the fire that starts it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much kind of in that I want to kind of pull at, and I think the first thing is it's so true. There's this very sort of human alchemy of the fire. It galvanizes the food, it galvanizes conversation and human connection, and I think that is something you definitely feel at MEATOPIA, because you've got the music, kind of the booze is sort of softening the edges, and you've got this the fire sort of dancing and the the smoke. I think that almost like takes away a lot of the stress. Weirdly, that's what I felt at least.
Yeah.
But what you said there about we had to convince people about our idea, right? And there'll be so many people listening to this podcast who are trying to either start a food business or a food brand, who may have such a nascent concept that's taking a while to convince people of what it is. How did you actually get brands and people involved in it when it was still a new concept? Like, what were the kind of things you actually specifically did to sort of show them what it was?
Well, when we first started, so we obviously we hadn't. I mean, I'd done small raves and little parties and stuff before. I'd always from the design angle. So I'd be about designing the poster, and then I'd sort of nail the rave on after that. But so I'd done little things. I'd sold tickets to stuff, but I'd never put on a festival. So what we've always done, and what we do over the years, is we collaborate with clever people. So the first person that me, James, and Rich sat in a room, got Josh over, like, let's do. We'd sold the idea to Josh. Josh goes home, and then we're like, how the fuck are we going to do this then? Anyone know anyone? And so there were a number of people we approached first that kind of, again, still didn't get it. Like people who had we went first to people who'd done raves and kind of music-based festivals. Because that's really, when you think back only a decade ago, that's really what there was. When you had a festival, because some people started calling us a meat rave, It's because before we were doing this, really, there was kind of street food, but it wasn't really there wasn't a food festival. I don't think there was a food festival. There might have been cheese festivals or, kind of things out. There was things out in Italy that I'd seen, like a big town that gets loads of Chianina T-bones, makes the whole town square into a grill and gets loads of Chianti, and they just drink Chianti and eat. There were these things, but there wasn't really one of those things we'd done. So, it was. We got involved. The first guy that we went through a load of people. No. Then Rich said, "Oh, hang on. I know this guy, my mate Dan O'Neill." So Dan had been involved with Lovebox, which was basically a big. Do you remember Lovebox?
Yeah, I've been before. Yeah,
big music event in Hackney, and I don't suppose it really had. It probably had a burger stall, but Dan at least knew how to run a party. So we got Dan involved, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, I get it." And then Dan brought in some other people who had links to food and F&B brands. So I mean, firstly, we wouldn't be able to put it on without the help of our partners. It costs a lot of money to put the event on, and it doesn't. If you just bought and sold your alcohol, didn't have any sort of input from them, it wouldn't turn a buck, right? So you need it. And the first people that came in, basically, they were saying, so, social media wasn't really as much of a thing as it is now. And anyway,
so what year is this? Sorry, mate.
The first one was 2013. So we were in 2012. Right. We were trying to get people to interested in this. James and I started. when social media started. We started using it on Turner and George and East London State Company. So we basically had nothing. And all we had was like kind of, well, we've done this, Richard's done this, I've done that, Dan's done this, James has done that. And they're sort of saying, so, right, so you want money off us, and you're going to, how many people? 3,000 people you're going to get in, or 2,500 maybe even. It's like, what's the value to us then, you know? And it was really just kind of, we just had to, I mean, you know, obviously with Dan's help, we just had to talk people around and say, look, it's going to be, you know, people are going to talk about this, they're going to push it on social media, you know, and we almost had to tell the brands what social media was, I suppose. But if you look forward now, and we've got, you know, across our different social media accounts, we've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of people following and liking and kind of, you know, and really committed people, you know. But yeah, back in that day, it's literally like you talk to a beer brand, they go, well, look, you know, we almost get more people in our pub than that in a weekend. Why are we going to give you money? So a lot of, I think the first beer brand was Meantime, actually, and they didn't give us money. They parked their beer truck up, which broke, and they said, look, we'll give you a little bit of free liquid, and then we'll sort of, you know, do a deal on the rest of it. And we got some, you know, we got some wine and some spirits people involved, and you know, it was hard yards. But after doing the first one, now it's then, you know, and going into that second year, which we didn't know we were going to do, and it's almost like after year one, which was chaotic and mad and all these kind of things, but brilliant. And it was kind of like, you know, sort of after it, we all cleared down, and I remember driving. I had this old Saab turbo car, you know, and I remember driving away from, because you have to clear out the event on Monday morning, and we still had shit there, you know. And and part of the things we had were pig fat and smoke soaked breeze blocks, which we built a pit out of. And it's like I had to stick them in the back of my Saab and take them to a dump, and my Saab just smelled of pig fat and smoke for like ever after, you know. But you know, couple of weeks after, and it's sort of almost like I'm like, so anyone want to do this again? And people are like, oh, I don't know, should we? Fucking hell, you know. And it all just felt a little bit like a risk. And so in the end, we just sort of we did the sums, realised it had probably if I was any better at maths, I'd realise it hadn't made money. But because I'm shit at maths, it made it look like we were all right, you know. So we all chucked in a small amount of money each and said, like, right, let's roll the dice again. Because my feeling basically was, if you do it once, it's a one-off thing. If you do it twice, it's a thing, you know. And even if it's not going to work, you know, if you do it twice, then it now has credibility. That's the thing.
Again, there's just so much in that. I think for listeners, it's, you know, they're trying to raise money or get people on board. Am I right in saying you were showing them the bigger vision, these brands who were kind of a bit reticent? Yeah. You were saying like this is going to become a bigger thing than what it is. You're almost showing them a 5-year vision, right? Yeah, and we're saying, look, it's not, you know, it's not just about 3,000 people on the ground. It's about, you know, I was saying, look, you know, if you look at MEATOPIA in New York, right? So if you look at how many people have looked at that around the world on their YouTube channels, if you look at how many people have looked at it on Twitter or whatever, you know, it's not just about these. So it's now, I mean, now brands talk a lot about your kind of your reach, you know. So you'll say, you know, when you're talking to a social media company, they'll run a deck about what is your reach, you know. So your reach could be how many people you've got at the event, how many people you've got on your socials looking, you know, experiencing it, and then how many people on, you know, if you want to develop a really big reach, you go, look, how many people of those social media followers, how many followers have they got, and who's looking at them, you know? So you can develop these incredible reach numbers, and that's what it's all about now. But that was really a kind of, you know, it was in its infancy, that kind of way of measuring how many eyeballs you get on your brand. But yeah, it was hard work. But yeah, we just had to convince them that it wasn't just the people on the ground. It's like it's how who else is looking at it and who's going. So I mean, that first year we had food writers, we had chefs, we had you know, people involved in music, and you know, it was who went. Again, so much in that. So, because I've got this whole thing about everyone like loves brand awareness, but there's a massive thing about brand depth. It's like, actually, who are you speaking to? And even if it is 2,000 people, if they're the right people, that's more important than 100,000, 150,000 if they're the wrong people. And I've got kind of obsessed with brand depth at the minute. So how did you get those first 2,000 punters there if there's no social media, or social media is still beginning to bubble per se?
There was social media. I mean, and I think at that time Richard had 2,500 on his Twitter. It's like he was our kind of poster boy. Josh, I mean, I think the American MEATOPIA had maybe 10,000 on it. I don't think there was Instagram, if I'm right. I don't think that had started yet, but there was I think there was Twitter and maybe Facebook. So there was, there was social media there, but we just didn't have much of it. So we linked with, the chefs we got in, and we went, look at their following, So we were really borrowing from other people and saying, look, this is, we're bringing these people over from the States. This is how many people have been to MEATOPIA in the States over those years. This is how much, money has been put into MEATOPIA in the States over these years. This is Richard Turner. Look at what Richard Turner's done. No one knew who I was or who James were. So it was like we had to really focus on Rich and I presume back in those days we also borrowed on Lovebox and what Dan had done and said, look, he's had X amount of 100,000 people through the doors. It started at this point and went to this point. So we sold the journey and we did what we did.
I sold the journey. That is so great, because I think there's so many people listening to this who are in that early stage, and it's just look around you, look at who's in your network, what can you do, what can you borrow from, sell the journey, sell the long-term vision. It's amazing. And I think it's really interesting about the Lovebox thing, because I've been to Tobacco Docks for like quite a few raves. They do an Elro rave there, and it's weird when you go into Tobacco Dock and it is like a meat rave, like quite literally. I was like, this is nuts. Like I was there, before. Why was there any other places other than Tobacco Docks that you considered doing out of interest?
Oh man, I spent like a year trying to go for venues. So first I looked at venues that would allow you to do events. So like Truman Brewery, all those kind of places, right? And the problems I came across were firstly that we'd say, right, we're going to put on this food event, it's going to be all these chefs, and they go, okay, you've got to use our caterers. And I'd be like, yeah, you're not listening to me. I can't use your fucking caterers. I'm bringing the food. They're like, no, you can't bring your own food. It's like, it's not a fucking wedding, right? So forget it. And then other people would go, yeah, okay, fine, you can do that. And I'm like, we have to have live fire. Oh no, you can't have fire. It's like, right, fine. So, and I started going, so in the early days, I looked at Victoria Park. But the expense, you have to seal it all off. You fence it. You need to police it 24 hours. You've got to build everything. If it rains, it's a grass site. I looked then at. I got in touch with film location companies to look at places that were maybe being used for location filming or that had planning blight. So it's like I looked at things like Dalston Yard where Johnny did Street Feast. I looked at places that were had been completely knocked down, but they were urban. And they had maybe 3 years till they're going to build a tower block on it. And it was only really later on I came across Tobacco Dock, which was a shopping centre. Well, it was originally a dock, right? So it's where you bought the tobacco in from the hot places abroad, And I don't think it was East India. It was somewhere else where it came in from. But they had these great big halls. And what they would do, they'd bring the tobacco in, they'd pile it up in piles just in these huge, great big halls. And that's why it's got this atrium with airflow coming in, because they would just dry it in, big piles of it in these huge rooms with the airflow was designed to come in and slowly dry it whilst being covered. And then eventually it would go down into the catacombs in barrels, I guess, and then probably go out again to the Empire on the boats again to sell to our, the countries we'd colonised, and it. In the 80s, it became a dreadful shopping centre that went bust. And I think they just started doing events. I think they were doing kind of like trade events, like, trade fairs and sort of some sort of high-end weddings and stuff. And they hadn't done anything like this. So we went in there and it was like, right, this is a grade 1 listed building. Right, we're going to light some fires. They're like, whoa. What, lighting fire?
Yeah,
it's going to be. So we had to do smoke tests. We had to do. We had to get the local council to approve. So we sort of cut this territory ourselves. We went in. we thought, like, under these big cutouts, you know, you've been there, you know, downstairs, there's these big sort of cutouts going up into the upstairs where you've got the roof, but it's got places where smoke can come out, you know, but the rain can't get in. And we sort of put these barbecues in down underneath the kind of bricks, and we had to do smoke tests to make sure it would leave. Second, we had to do heat tests to make sure the heat wouldn't burn the bricks, and then like fat tests to make sure that the fat bubbling up wouldn't scorch the bricks or colour the bricks. We have to then, I mean, the flagstones on the floor are listed, so we have to put down these kind of materials, fireproof materials, on the floor to make sure that fat doesn't spill and that fire doesn't sort of crack the bricks. Or, I mean, yeah, there were all these things we had to do, but it just became clear that this was one of the. It's just because it's indoor outness. It's just the perfect venue because you've got 2 layers of internal space that you can cook in because of that roof with the holes in it and the kind of air coming through it, and then obviously you've got the quayside where you can put all the big smokers and stuff, and then all those massive rooms to the sides where we do the Tintopia, where we do the slaughterhouse and the pub, and you know, so it was just kind of, and that, you know, that's what I look for now when I go around the world. We were looking to move it out of London just before the pandemic, but obviously that put paid to that.
Where were you planning to put it?
I can't say, unfortunately, 'cause it's not agreed yet. But I've looked. You know, when looking for venues now, I look for something that's got a bit of industrialness to it. It's got some indoor for all the kind of eating and the drinking and the you know, bars and stuff. It's got some outdoor so you can cook, and just a mix of the both. You know.
Is it in the UK though? Still, I'm hoping. I mean, as a consumer.
We have looked at places in the UK, but I'm also looking at sort of, you know, Europe, and I've got someone actually looking at an Indian venue as well, actually. But
oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, I mean, listen, if all the people that what happens is people often come to MEATOPIA and they come from miles away. They're like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. I just want to take this back to and I'm fine. Give me a card, great, you know, and I'll speak to these people and I'll say, look, firstly, it costs a lot of money and we have high standards, right? Secondly, I'll send you a spreadsheet, see if it works, you know. And I think basically they balk at it, they look at it and they go, "Fucking hell, it costs that much? You make that much?" I think they all think we just make a huge amount of money and spend no money, when that's not actually the truth. But if everyone who came there and said, "My God, I've got to take this home to insert name here," actually did it, we'd be in 24 countries.
I understand that for sure. Where I want to go to now, mate, and you talked about, you know, Richard being in the paras and in the army, and I do think why I love chefs so much, and I do think there's a lot of parallels between running a business and running a kitchen. You know, it's kind of, it's, you know, and Bourdain did such a good job of creating, almost rebranding chefs as this kind of, these rock star raconteurs who are creative and chaotic and wild, but they've also got this just discipline, work ethic, like, you know, the mise en place and all this, just that swift service, moving fast. And obviously you hang around and work with loads of chefs, but you've also, you know, do a lot of the creative branding side. I'd kind of almost like want to explore parallels from the kitchen into business. So I think pressure is a really interesting thing because lots of people listening to this have raised money, they're under pressure, they're having to put cost prices increases through. People are under pressure in the environment right now. What's been kind of the most pressure you've been under? And it could be maybe the Workers' League. And are there any lessons from chefs or the kitchen that have helped you face those challenges?
I think you know, yes, there are. I mean, just in their, you know, chefs' dedication to what they do. And I mean, if you you know, so I mean, at the weekend, for instance, I put on an event, you know, like Jack May, who's a great Jack May from Barebone. He's now doing a residency at our Workers' League in Whitstable, and barbecue chefs, proper barbecue chefs, him and Mark O'Brien, who's now cooking in Whitstable. Those real barbecue guys. What you got to remember, you're sitting there eating the food, right? When did that happen? About 2 fucking days ago, where they spent all night smoking something or marinating something before they smoked it. You know, you wouldn't do this if you didn't love it. And you know, the whole process, especially with low and slow cooking, you know, from the sourcing the product, designing the menu, to sourcing the product, to cooking, it can be days and days. And often you literally have got to, I mean, like Mark, when he did a thing at Workers' League a few weekends ago, he came in to cook, he put some of his beef and pork on at 11 p.m. And then had a couple of hours kip on the sofa during the night, took it out again at 6 a.m. and then service was from 12, you know. So, and you know, Jack's the same. He'll be smoking this stuff. Often he'll be up all night the night before. So, I mean, that kind of dedication to what you're doing, and just the belief in that if you do something beautiful, delicious and worthy, that people will come and enjoy it. I mean, that is a great business lesson. I mean, I did a business talk to some university students recently, and one of the things I've said is like, in the old days, my parents' generation, when they went to school and university, often you'd be training for a particular job. So what you're going to be, because what you're going to choose what you're going to be, and then you're going to be that for all your life. You're going to be a whatever, you're going to have that job all the way through to you're 50 or 60. You're going to buy your house, feed your family, you know, get your gold watch, die, and that's it, and you know, you're done. And those kind of people would say, son, do not make your hobby your job. And by that, what they meant was, you'll have a job, you'll have it all your life, you'll probably fucking hate it, but in the evenings you can do what you like, you know, after you've fed the family and paid the mortgage, and then when you retire you can do what you like if you live long enough. But don't make your hobby your job, because you won't make any money. I think it's almost flip reverse now. Many of the kids coming out of college, university, wherever now, probably, I mean, you might go into a profession, you might study law, accountancy, medicine, and then you might have, you know, one of the big professions, you might then be that all your life. But the chances are you're probably going to be many things during your working life, and you often work for yourself. So what I generally say to them is like, look, find something you like doing, because one of the first things about business, you might be an Elon Musk, or you might be a Jeff Bezos, but probably what you're going to be is fucking poor for ages. So you may as well love what you're doing while you're poor, and then it's that hanging on a little bit longer than it feels right to do, and then it might work. But you can't just expect it to happen overnight. And if you're doing something you just think is a great idea, but you hate it, you won't have that passion. You won't be able to stay in the game long enough to make anything out of it. So, you know, that's the thing. I mean, I spent a long time with businesses where, you know, basically I was kind of piss poor, where everyone else was like kind of, you know, had shitloads of money and, you know, was just going into work and doing their 9 to 5, whereas I'm sort of working till midnight and I'm still bloody poor. But, you know, that's it, and that's the thing. Definitely, I've certainly, you know, learned from chefs who are just, you know, they're days before the event, and they're smoking a little part of something that will then be brought out and then put with something else and then put into something else that they cook. You know, you know, they're dehydrating something, they're marinating something, they're brining something. You know, it's like you have to have a passion for it.
I know, almost kind of selfishly, that's what it's almost like with this podcast. I mean, like even this hour and a half or so conversation, like I think for me, I've read a book that like took 4 days, and I think once you find your passion, you just keeps building, and you don't mind not making money. And I think it's what the bit you said there about just hanging on is really important, because there'll be so many obstacles on the journey where you just think, that little voice in your head saying, give up. Yeah.
I mean, how many musicians, you know, have their parents said, you want to give this up? You're never going to make any money out of this, you know. I expect all the Beatles got that, you know. I know the Sex Pistols got that, you know. It's like, it literally is that. And I think the other thing I say to people is you've got to have a degree of idiocy, right, to make it in business. Because you look at some of the best ideas in the world, fucking stupid, but you know, it worked, right? And you know, I would often run. My dad lectured in business as one of his final careers, you know, and I'd often take my idea to my dad. He'd go, okay, let's look at this, right, what's your bottom line, what's your ins, what's your outs? Like, you're going to be bankrupt in 3 months, this is a shit idea, don't do it, you know. And you know, some of the I just stopped asking my dad, because I didn't want him to tell me it doesn't stack up, you know. And I think that's you have to be a little bit of an idiot, you know, to get a successful idea going.
I think it's like almost like naivety is a superpower, because I think naivety, if with MEATOPIA, if you were to follow logically it doesn't work up back in those early days.
No.
because you were kind of, as you say, well, interchangeably, degree of idiocy or naivety is a superpower. Like, look what you've built now. It's insane. And I think the other thing as well, and what I love about chefs is they're not willing. They're very open and willing to handle criticism and feedback and kind of just take it on the chin. And again, that's a parallel in business. Is there any, like, what feedback have you taken, or how do you navigate the feedback waters? And are there any lessons from chef with that? Because sometimes it can be, it can pour piss on your fire. Do you know what I mean? Quite literally.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, in sort of within that kind of sphere, one of the things, because we go out and taste the dishes, right? So, you know, we'll ask a chef, a great chef, to prepare, you know, say a chicken one, a pork one, a fish one. We'll come and taste them and we'll choose, right? And you know, initially when I first started doing this, obviously if I'm with Richard, it's like, okay, he's a great chef, you know. But I was like a creative. And you know, before I started working with James, I couldn't have distinguished a sirloin between a sirloin and a ribeye. I'd be like steak, you know. So I'm now in front of these fucking really great chefs and some of the, you know, my food heroes, and I'm going. And I'm choosing, you know, it's like, and you really feel like an imposter sometimes. But what, you know, what now I you know, what I say is I won't ever say, you know, that shit, you know, I never do that. Because generally I love all food, so it won't be, and you know, it's a brilliant chef, so it will never be dreadful. But I might say, look, I tell you what I like in there is this. Could I have a bit more of that? And also, I can tell you this is delicious. However, I know that what will sell more is that one, because more people will like that. I want to have this, and we always have to have. I mean, I could just fill the whole place with burgers and steaks, and we'd make more money. But I need to have those challenging things like offals and you know and you know, flavours and tastes that aren't so popular, aren't so sort of you know, sort of mainstream. Because that's what we're about. We're about showing people new ways to eat, and also how to use if you're going to kill an animal, have respect for it by eating everything. Don't give anything. You know, what bit of this do I give to the dog? Nothing. Give the dog beans. You know, don't feed any of it to the dog. Eat all of it. So I mean, that's sort of trying to, you know, what I'm saying, I guess, is trying to give criticism to my food heroes. I will always. I can do it now. I feel like an imposter, but I'm more focusing on, you know, what in it I like most and what I'd like to dial up more, and what personally I'd dial down, and also using my knowledge and experience to say like where you're positioned in the event and the day you're on and who you're next to. I know this one is going to be better for you than that one. If that helps.
No, it does. And how did you, again, imposter syndrome is something that everyone faces starting a business, right? And it's kind of the other side of the degree of idiocy. It makes you kind of, it's the two sides of the same coin. If you're doing something with idiocy, there's baked in that as imposter syndrome. Like, how do you navigate that? Like,
I think just, I mean, you know, I'm being a designer, and I think what designers are, a design is plagiarism. So being an art director, creative, what you're doing is you're looking and you're seeing things that are trends or things that you like, and you're stealing them and making them into a new thing, you know. And it's you know, I listen and I learn. So I mean, everything I know about food, I've learned from the amazing chefs and the amazing butchers and the amazing, like, you know, fire makers and restaurateurs that I've met. So it's, you know, it's building on that and almost kind of, you know, if a bit of imposter syndrome comes in, you could sort of go, well, actually, what I'm telling you isn't what I think, it's what I've learned off this person who's a fucking genius, and we all know they are, so it's true, right? You know, and that's the thing, you know. So it's basically, it's plagiarism, it's listening and learning and keeping your eyes and ears open, you know, because you know, I've got all this information coming in. And it's not, I didn't make it or invent it, I'm just repeating it. So
no, mate, few final questions, mate, and then we'll wrap this up. But I'm thoroughly enjoying it. There again, back to this kind of chef lens, I suppose, is they're willing to fail. Chefs are willing to fail. What's been one of your favourite failures that has then set you up for future success?
Sorry, say the question again.
like what? So chefs are very good at failing. They don't mind failing with whether that's with dishes. What's been like one of your favourite failures that then set you up for future success?
Favourite failures? Yeah, that is God.
Well, they may not be favourite, but like what one that's taught you a lot of lessons that have then paved the way forward is another way of looking at it.
I tell you what, the hardest one at the moment was with the pandemic coming in, and so I was lucky enough to have. Who knew what was going to happen? But I was lucky enough to be involved in 2 food businesses. So MEATOPIA couldn't happen during the pandemic, so we switched it off. We pivoted. We did online stuff. We did MEATOPIA at home. But Turner and George went stratospheric because everyone wanted to buy good food to be delivered. But the office business, as I said to you earlier, the office business just crumbled, and it's like, fucking hell. What our business is offices, and literally the government is telling you not to go to them. It's like that was kind of a real kind of what do we do? So sort of turning the office business into understanding that and realising that rug can just be pulled out like that, and turning that into more of a lifestyle business and sort of crossed over with hospitality and working out how people's lives are going to change. That was a big lesson. So that business suffered some real punches to the nuts. So that I guess is up until then, really, we'd been lucky enough that the things I'm involved in probably to go quite well. It's you can, and this is when I guess this is the opposite to imposter syndrome as well. Starting to think that everything you do, you're a genius. You start to believe your own legend, And up until then, everything we did, it's like fuck, I'll just do anything, throw it at the wall, it'll be brilliant, And realizing that's actually not the case. You've just been. People say, you've been lucky, you make your own luck, you put yourself in the right place. And what you realise is we've put ourselves in the right place around the great people, and we've recognised those people's greatness and stood on the shoulders of giants, if you like. So, we're not genius, we're just in the right place at the right time. But, sort of that whole, the whole challenges for the office and work business around the time of the pandemic was like a real kind of wake up call of like fuck, this can really go wrong, if that answers. I'm not sure.
No, it absolutely does. And well, this genuinely, this is not a shameless plug, but I think lots of our listeners are brands who want co-working space, right? Because you've got sites in like Shoreditch, Blackheath, where's the other one?
Where I am now,
yeah, so if anyone is listening to this and wants like flexible workspace, check out the Workers League. And I think the idea, lots of my listeners are food brands, right? So I think if you're doing this amazing stuff with like these chefs and making it more of a vibe, that's really interesting.
Well, I think, so the new sites, Blackheath and Whitstable are 2 new sites, and I've built in a kind of a kitchen aspect to both of them. So in Whitstable, I've got a live fire grill and a wood oven in the office, and we can sort of break it down quite quickly and turn it into this barbecue joint at the weekend. And then at Blackheath, there's this massive it's down a little mews, a massive outdoor deck. So I've got a guy called Liam Barker doing a Caribbean barbecue down there this weekend. So absolutely, it's sort of and we the product the products I sell, the beers and the drinks and I try and keep that real and sort of good quality. So it would be a good place for people who like food to come and work.
Oh man, I'm getting hungry thinking about this.
I'm hungry.
Final question, Matt. And what has been like? You must have tried, and I literally kind of would love to have your job in some respects, gallivanting around trying all this banging food. What has been not necessarily your favourite, but the most poignant dish you've tried at MEATOPIA? Maybe the one with like the best story behind it, or what's one dish that is like really sentimental to you? I'd love to know that.
Sentimental. So I mean, I think what I'd probably have to say is there are sort of things that I know everyone says this sort of thing, but there's just so many good bits of food. I mean, when Aaron Franklin came in year 1 and did his brisket and his guy Braun sat by the smoker all night, and they were terrified because they used USDA brisket, which is really really fatty, has that kind of sticky fat, and they were using grass-fed briskets over here, and they were like, oh my God, is it going to work? I mean, that was just seismic. And when he turned out this, you know, Aaron Franklin's brisket was just incredible. When Charlie Cowell did the whole spit roast cow, I mean, that was a bit of a moment, you know.
Spit roast cow?
Yeah, I think 2014, 2015. So and it was during the BSE time. So you had to remove the spine, I think, of any animal over a certain amount of years, you know. So it was fraught with difficulty, and arguably not the best way to cook a cow either. So, but never mind that. You know, this whole thing was basically split in half, put on this frame, which he turned with this huge ship's wheel over a pit with kind of these collectors collecting the fat, which he then sort of rebasted over. I mean, that was like an incredible looking thing, you know. Like, what other crazy dishes? I mean, there was one actually, a chef called Matti Hertier from Switzerland. He did reindeer in its own terroir, so it had like a kind of a moss and a lichen and these berries that it eats, and yeah, it's just an incredible thing. Oh, and a chef called so he came from God, what's his name now? Big guy. He came to Dublin with us as well, and he did a sausage, and it felt like this was going to go. It was really going to go wrong, because he was making his own sausage, and and one of his instructions, he was going on to these phone calls with him. He was on his way over from America, and it's like a week out. He's like, right, I need you to get these tendons on. You've got to start cooking them at 60 degrees, 4 days out, you know. And it's like, it was just incredible. It was a bologna, like a bologna sausage with these, you know. It was just, you know, and it was just, we were just thinking, this guy's a lunatic. It's going to go wrong. It's crazy. It was just one of the most, you know, beautiful things Sawyer, Chef Sawyer. One of the
Chef
most
Sawyer. How do you spell that? Chef
Sawyer. Chef Sawyer. Yes, chef. Yes, chef. It's like he was. You know, he's not one of those guys, but long hair. It's only my kind of my ex-COVID brain that has. If you're listening, chef, I'm really sorry that I'm not immediately saying your first name, because I got him to do Dublin as well, and he did an amazing thing in Dublin. He did like it was like a nonna's pasta. It was gnocchi, but it was with a great big like beef bones cooking in stew. It was a stew essentially of like short rib and things hanging and dripping and kind of, you know, and things on trivets and essentially a gnocchi with meat in a sauce and you'd be like, you know, and
I'm starving.
I'm really hungry, and it's like, you know, one of the organizer at the time, Claire Isaacs, was saying to me, Matt, this isn't going to work. It won't work. It's not MEATOPIA, and it really did. It really did work. You know, yeah, it was brilliant. So yeah, those things.
Mate, I've absolutely loved that. It's so great to kind of explore, you know, Josh, his impact, the kind of adding a bit of depth to MEATOPIA. It's a festival, as I say, it's one of my favourite days of the year. It's all the chefs that I love. And there are just so many sort of lessons in that as well for listeners. So really appreciate it, mate.
Brilliant. No, I mean, I've really enjoyed it, Dan. Good to see you again. And you know, on another note, you know, well done. I mean, when I first met you, you hadn't started this. That was a few years ago, wasn't it? And then
I hadn't started any of this. Yeah. So
you built a thing. Brilliant. Well done.
Mate, legend. Thank you. I'm just gonna whack the.